Good morning. It's a huge pleasure for me to be here. I'm Danielle Pletko with the American Enterprise Institute. I am not going to introduce our panelists because their bios are all part of your program, and we have a limited amount of time to talk about something hugely complicated, reasonably controversial, and notwithstanding all of that, terribly interesting. So if I can start with you, Luke, just let's talk very quickly and succinctly about the controversy. This has divided the Republican Party in a way that has been, to me, a Reaganite, extremely strange and rather unpleasant. We've got an appropriation for Israel that has been stripped out in the House, and all the money for Ukraine, all the humanitarian assistance for Ukraine, all gone. So what the hell is going on?
Thanks. It's great to be here to talk about this. Yes, some of the divisions inside the Republican Party in general and some inside the conservative movement specifically, they are concerning. But I am, for the most part, relaxed about this. When I'm on Capitol Hill and I speak to staffers behind closed doors or members, I get the impression that a majority of Republicans still support arming Ukraine. There's a very vocal minority, very vocal, that's out there telling us otherwise. But also, when I travel across America, I'm from rural Missouri. I visit my family a few times a year. I go out there, and this is Trump country, and I can find Ukrainian flags in people's front yards. The other day, I was out in the Shenandoah fly fishing in a place where there was no cell phone coverage. I saw a Ukrainian flag right there. Americans support the underdog, and we instinctively want to stick it to Russia when we can because of the thoughts and legacies of the Cold War. So I have no doubt that if there is a vote tomorrow on the floor, it will pass. We just have to get it to a point where there is a vote. That's the crucial part right now.
Okay, so that was a very encouraging and warm and fuzzy statement that is actually belied by poll numbers that have declined dramatically. Where last year we had polling numbers up in the 70s and 80s among Republicans in support for Ukraine against Russia, now those numbers have softened down to around 50%. And I know where you stand. I know where I stand. Yeah. But in fact, we've also lost about 50 more members in the House than we would have a year ago. So there is something going on.
Yeah. So
try to tell me what.
Well, I'm still encouraged by the poll numbers. The war in Ukraine, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and our response to that is very much now seen as a Biden administration issue. So show me another issue that's branded with Joe Biden that 50 to 60% of Republicans still back and support. There isn't one. There isn't. Oh, okay, Israel. other than perhaps Israel. But I wouldn't say. Yeah. Okay. But my point is, there is still strong support for this. Now, on all foreign policy matters, Americans want to be led. Again, going back to my family in rural Missouri, they care about health care, education for their kids, jobs, retirements, this sort of thing, right? Cost of groceries going up. They want to be led on foreign policy. They want to worry about the issues that impact them directly day to day. But there's been this communications vacuum created by the Biden administration explaining to the American people why what happens in Ukraine matters. And when President Biden does explain this to the American people, he uses words like, we have to protect the rules-based order and these things which are meaningless to most Americans. So there's been a lack of communication, which I think has created this vacuum that has allowed the anti-Ukraine crowd to fill. Had we not, if we didn't have this vacuum, I suspect poll numbers would still be higher amongst Republicans.
Luke is an inveterate optimist, and so I'm glad I'm here because I am an inveterate pessimist. Dalibor, what Luke says is really important, right? The bully pulpit. I wrote a piece, I don't know if you saw it, but I wrote a piece about how Biden has not given one speech, not one speech about Ukraine, not from the Oval Office, not from anywhere. In the State of the Union this year, it wasn't till 10:06 that he mentioned it, and it starts at 9. That he mentioned it. So I think that what Luke alludes to is true, but I think it belies a different attitude towards what the outcome should be than perhaps what we would design were we kings of the world. What do you think is really going on, Dalibor?
So I haven't read your piece. I will read your piece.
Oh, damn it.
Promise.
Those days are done.
Then you can't do that to me any longer. But I mean, the thing is, I have mixed feelings about this. So on the one hand, I very often hear people on Capitol Hill in right of center organizations, not Luke and Hudson Institute, but further down Massachusetts Avenue, saying that they are not going to support aid to Ukraine because the administration hasn't articulated a strategy for victory. And I fear that use of this argument, their use of this argument is very often disingenuous. That we heard them complain early on about Europeans not doing their fair share. Now the EU and European countries are spending almost twice as much on helping Ukraine as the United States. We heard them complain about corruption. That 3 IGs and all the weapons have GPS trackers. There is very little evidence of weapon systems ending up in wrong hands. So I would sort of discount the use of this argument in some quarters. I would also say that this is not a US war effort. I mean, this is an effort of Ukrainians to defend their country, and Ukrainians will be the ultimate judges of how far they want to go in this effort, whether they want to wage a long war that results in them retaking their territory, whether they want to, or whether they have, they are forced by circumstances into some form of frozen conflict. And I think we should be sort of deferring to them. And more importantly, it is in our interest to support the Ukrainians, regardless of what calls they make about when this war is to end. I mean, what we are getting out of this is that we have somebody else fighting one of our major geopolitical foes, leading to considerable attrition of Russian military power, making Russia much less of a headache for NATO, and therefore, at a very minimal cost to the United States. That said, I mean, of course, we are not just bystanders or somebody cheering from the sidelines. We actually have a lot of control over how this war goes. And my beef with the administration and the approach taken by the United States and Western allies is that we've tried to do it on the cheap in a way that does not lead to a decisive, quick Ukrainian victory. While we have the resources to do that, at a very minimal cost to ourselves, we could have given Ukrainians very early on what they needed to push the Russians out, to inflict much greater casualty rates and damage on the Russian military, and really the war could have been in a different place had we not been withholding, every weapon system. Really, there was this sort of debate going on about whether this is not a bridge too far, and now we are having the same debate with F-16s. Germans are having the same debate over the Taurus systems, and so on and so forth. And I think, as long as this is the mindset dominating the administration, I mean, this war is unlikely to lead to a decisive Ukrainian victory, and I think that's a shame for the world. It's a shame for the United States, and I think it promises more instability ahead.
Right. Okay. Fair enough. I think you've made a good case. It's the persuasive case that we've heard. They are fighting a fight in which we are a very interested party in the outcome, and they are fighting it instead of us, which is, I think, a great case to be made. And I wish the president made it more aggressively. But I do think that there is a rhyme and a reason behind the administration's lack of strategy, the administration's slow rolling, because Dalibor is exactly right. Every single weapon system we have given to the Ukrainian has been a weapon system that we refused previously to give to the Ukrainians, right? And so this suggests that there's a certain outlook inside the administration. I didn't vote for Joe Biden, but they're not all idiots. Right? They recognize what is going on. And they see that, we said no to this. Now we're saying yes. We said no to that. One of the reasons is their fear of escalation. But I think that they actually are also interested in a negotiated outcome. I think they're interested in negotiated peace. Do you think that's wrong? And how do you explain their slow rolling?
I mean, I'm the spokesman for the National Security Council, but I think fear of escalation is certainly one driver of this, and also the sort of sense. I think sometimes it takes very intelligent people and very highly educated people to believe in nonsense, and I think this is one of those instances where really some very smart people in the administration are trying to be too clever by half, and the reality is that there is no possibility of a negotiated, stable outcome as long as Russia pursues its maximalist war aims. At no point throughout this war, in spite of the various Russian setbacks, have we heard Putin or the Kremlin move away from their twin objective of Ukraine's demilitarization and denazification, which means basically regime change in Kiev, basically placing the country under Russian occupation or sort of turning it into a satellite of Russia. As long as that's the war aim, you can't really negotiate over territory. I mean, the sort of idea that Ukrainians can give something to the Kremlin that would sort of lead to a stable situation, that's just fanciful. That's totally unrealistic thinking.
I want to go to Andrei, but I want to come back to the question of whether if they gave them Crimea, that would, which obviously had been a ex post facto. Andrei, thank you for being here as well. One of the things that worries me, and for those of you who are interested in this, Dalibor and my colleague Fred Kagan run something called the Critical Threats Project. They, together with another think tank in Washington called the Institute for the Study of War, do an everyday analysis of the state of military play between Russia and Ukraine. And my husband reads it to me religiously every night. And lately, I've not enjoyed it as much because there seems to be a bit of a stalemate that we're looking at. Andrei, if you look at the state of play right now between the Ukrainians and the Russians, where do you see it going? I mean, can we last in this stasis forever? What needs to happen?
First of all, thank you for inviting me here. And with your permission, I will answer your question at the end of my remarks, which has three main points which I'd like to share with the audience. The first one that definitely you've heard and you've read many times, and even in this audience, such a phrase, war in Ukraine. Each time when you hear or read this particular term, you should be aware. This is a Kremlin propaganda term. That's a KGB invention. It's just for very clear purpose to distract attention from the chief culprit of this war, Russia. Russia and Putin himself. So so that is why if you look at New York Times or Washington Post, there will be war in Ukraine, war in Ukraine, war in Ukraine, or CNN and so on. But in reality, this is, you can call it a Russian war against Ukraine, Russian invasion in Ukraine, Russian aggression against Ukraine, Russian-Ukrainian war, whatever you can call, but it would be more appropriate and more correct titles, not the war in Ukraine. That's if you by any chance would repeat this phrase, this term, you should be aware you're repeating KGB propaganda. Second point is about the real size of U.S. military aid to Ukraine. Certainly, you've heard that United States and especially Biden administration is providing Ukraine with billions. Hundreds of billions of military aid to Ukraine. Even some Republican candidates for presidency are saying that hundreds of billions of military aid have been given to Ukraine. If you just to be more knowledgeable and we're looking for some kind of more so-called academics publications, they will call 113 billion US dollars military aid to Ukraine. If you're a fan of Washington Post, you would read the special article on some kind of study pretending to be academic one in August that the US administration is given about 70 billion US dollars as a military aid of Ukraine. All of these numbers you've heard right now from me or from others are nonsense. They are incorrect. If you'd like to know what real size of US military aid, you need to remember about three levels of aid. One is US Congress appropriation, the amount of money that is being given by the US Congress to any particular project, including for US military aid to Ukraine. Second is commitment of US administration, which would be, it could coincide with appropriation of the Congress, but can be lower, but cannot be more. And third level would be physical delivery of US military aid to Ukraine on the territory of Ukraine. So that is why I will provide you these three numbers, which is good to remember. The US Congress appropriation for 2 financial years, 2022 and 2023 financial years, for all military aid, through all channels, through everything, $48 billion. That's all. Not hundreds. Not 100, not 113, not 70, $48 billion is the absolute ceiling of US Congress appropriation for US military aid to Ukraine. Now, second stage, US administration commitment, so kind of the promise to provide this year, next year, in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time, whatever. At the moment, as of today, it's $44.5 billion. So US administration commitment is less than appropriation of US Congress. Now the final, the most important number, at least for Ukrainians, because they need to use not something that they have been promised in 5 years' time, but what they can have and what they can use at this moment on the battlefield. This amount is 20.2. Again, 20.2 is all military aid provided by United States of America from February 24th, 2022 up to today, as of today. I checked it in the morning. $20.2 billion. So in the 22 financial years, it was $8 billion. This year is $12 billion. That's all. So on average, it's $1 billion a month. Just for comparison, in the 1941, when the President Roosevelt opened the Lend-Lease for Britain, United States was not a part of the, not participating in the Second World War yet, in the spring of 41. United States provided United Kingdom in the spring of 41 military aid at level $40 billion a month using current prices, 2022. So that is why the US military aid to Ukraine at this moment, roughly speaking, 40 times smaller than the US military aid to United Kingdom in the spring 41 before Pearl Harbor. So the third point, sorry for long, but it's important. What is the strategy of the Biden administration towards Ukraine? It's very clear, and it has been announced. Daniel mentioned that there was no speech of Mr. Biden on Ukraine, but there was a very important speech of Mr. Blinken, Secretary of State, on June 2nd in Helsinki on occasion of Finland joining NATO. And this is almost all speech devoted to Ukraine and Russian-Ukrainian war. In that speech, Mr. Blinken has announced the strategic goal of Biden administration: do not allow Putin to lose. Once again, do not allow Putin to lose this war. Did you miss this? It's a very important speech.
We're surprised. Can you explain?
Okay, it's not me. You can ask Mr. Blinken. So Mr. Blinken was very open, and he said, our goal is to put Mr. Putin at the table of negotiations. It does not mean to lose. It does not mean to be defeated. It does mean to put him on the table with Mr. Zelensky. The goal of Ukrainian government, and Mr. Zelensky said not once, that their goal is not only to liberate all these territories, not only to liberate all people who have been hostages or POW on the Russian side, not only to have reparations for Ukraine and compensation for Ukrainian governments, but also to have a trial for military crimes, for military criminals, with Mr. Putin as the number one culprit for this war. Mr. Blinken was very open, saying no to any trial, to any international court against military criminals. His goal, and I understand that he was talking not only on behalf of himself and not only on behalf of the Department of State, but on behalf of the whole administration. His goal is to put Mr. Putin at the negotiations table to discuss whatever, Crimea, Donbass, territorial gains of Putin's Russia in Ukraine, and so on. So we need to understand that the strategy of Biden administration is not to allow Ukraine to defeat Putin's Russia. And it's not only a statement of Mr. Blinken, that is the behavior and the policy of the administration over these 20 years, with all this military aid that we're talking about all these ATACMS missiles, all that should be sent to Ukraine many, many, many months or years ago, but they have never been sent. But also, you know, what was a critical moment of Mr. Putin over the last 20 months of this war, or maybe of all his presidency. This is a day, June 24. This year. What was this day? It was Mr. Prigozhin's mutiny. When Mr. Prigozhin's Wagner's troops were marching to Moscow. As we know, they marched about 800 kilometers and stopped a couple of 100 kilometers near Moscow. What happened in this day? It was almost a tragedy for Biden administration. And exactly that day, when Wagner troops marching to Moscow, there were 4 telephone calls from Washington, where? To Moscow. One was Mr. Burns, CIA director, called Mr. Naryshkin, head of Foreign Intelligence Service of Russia, expressing full support of Mr. Putin and expressing that it is not possible that Mr. Prigozhin would win. Second call was call of Mr. Blinken to Mr. Lavrov, with expressing the same support. Third was Mr. Austin call to Mr. Shoigu with the same message. And the fourth call was Mr. Sullivan was calling Mr. Patrushev, the head of Security Council of Russia, with the same message. It's published. Sorry, it's all public information. I'm not saying anything.
Perhaps we can move back to move on a little bit.
So that is why just you're asking. So what could be the result if this amount of military support that has been given so far to Ukraine is continued to be, but it's not continued because it was $1 billion for previous months. Now it is $200 million. So it's just 5 times smaller than the sort of drop level of military support. So it would mean that Ukraine will be defeated, no doubt.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I do think one of the most interesting questions that among the many things that you highlighted, is an article that Dollar War and my colleague Mark Thiessen wrote last week about where this money is being spent. Almost 90% of the money for Ukraine is not going to Ukraine. It's going to actually revitalize our exhausted and inoperative defense industrial base, which is quite interesting. I'm going to open things up to questions in just about a minute and a half, which means that I'm going to ask you a quick question, and you must answer it quickly, and then we can turn to our audience. So you're our defense guy, right?
Yes.
That is my understanding. Tell me what's going to happen in this war. I mean, honest to goodness. Look, part of the reason why there's frustration and lagging support is this sense that there is not momentum towards victory. Fair, unfair, Biden administration's secret plot or not. What happens? How do we talked about this going into next year.
So soon after the large-scale invasion, I was writing reports and articles saying that this war will be measured in years, and we should start thinking about it this way now. Instead of hinging all of our hopes on single counteroffensives, we should be thinking of this as an extended campaign that will have many ups and downs. On the ground right now, on the land side of things, it's going slowly with this counteroffensive. If you look at the maritime domain, it's going quite well. The Black Sea Fleet has been, for all intents and purposes, pushed out of its bases in Crimea. So we have to, in occupied Crimea. So we have to view this in the long term, and we have to start thinking more big picture and strategic about this. And this is where the narrative from the White House comes in and out in this question on my answer on this point. We keep hearing that Americans are tired of forever wars, so we can't support Ukraine. We have fatigue. I say this as an Afghan vet. 99.5% of Americans never served in Iraq or Afghanistan. There was never any special war tax levied on American families. The idea that Americans are tired of Ukraine's wars, imagine what Ukrainians feel like. Imagine how tired they are. So I think this whole we're done with forever wars nonsense is very much an inside the beltway message that actually doesn't resonate with most of America. So we need better messaging.
Right. No, I mean, I think that's really important. Where were the parades demanding that we withdraw from Afghanistan? Nowhere. I want to just broaden the aperture for a second so that you can talk about something which I think is hugely important. We are looking right now at two very hot wars going on. Ukraine, Russia's war on Ukraine, and I think that was a very important point. We should call it Russia's war on Ukraine, not Ukraine's war. And obviously Hamas's war on Israel. Everybody hated the expression axis of evil, but sometimes the shoe fits, right? So we're talking about Russian, Iranian, Chinese cooperation that is in all of these theaters. Talk about the problem that you can play forward with this scenario of these countries joining an axis of resistance, to use the Iranian phrase.
I think, at some level, it is very easy to make the case for U.S. assistance to Ukraine in very parochial terms. Like, we are rebuilding our military and sending old stuff to the Ukrainians, and we are helping Ukrainians to significantly weaken one of our big geopolitical foes without any direct involvement or cost to U.S. servicemen, and so. That's great news, but I think it is useful to sort of step back and see the bigger picture as well. And I understand that within the freedom conservatism movement, there will be many people who will have mixed feelings about entangling alliances or America going out in search of monsters to destroy. But as AEI's resident Eastern European, I don't take the so-called rules-based international system for granted, and throughout my adult life, I've seen bad actors, people who hate freedom, who hate constitutional government, who hate democracy, who hate free markets, to push back and erode the world that America after the Second World War created. And throughout the Obama years, throughout the mercurial Trump presidency, and throughout the Biden presidency with the Afghanistan withdrawal, with this war in Ukraine, indeed with the 2014 appeasement of Putin after annexation of Crimea, the bad actors, Iran, China, Russia, have been sort of chipping away at the system, and I think with very grave consequences for the cause of freedom worldwide. And Ukraine offers an opportunity to push back very forcefully at a very little cost to the United States, and we would be foolish not to take that opportunity.
God, thank you. Andy, I want to ask you a quick up or down question. Putin, how solid is his reign over Russia?
Very.
There. Okay, now it's your turn, and I apologize. We've sucked up a lot of the oxygen. This gentleman here, perhaps we could pass you the microphone. Yeah. And I'll share with you guys.
It seems like there's room for a 2.0 on Powell doctrine. It used to be very clear plan, overwhelming force, get in, and then accomplish a very specific goal and get out. But in fact, get out is a ridiculous idea in a world of swimming in warm zones. And to your point, it's actually not a lot of people. In some cases, it could be no people in the case of Ukraine. Is there any work at AEI or amongst you guys on sort of a new idea for this? And could it just be slotted into the federal budget? Not an emergency spending, but the highest ROI slice of the defense budget is, maintaining a warm zone presence.
I mean, I do fear that part of the problem is that the world is getting progressively more dangerous as our political system is getting more dysfunctional. So the sole fact that in budgeting we are so relying on these continuing resolutions and last-minute deals just make it very hard to make sort of serious planning and commitments of this sort possible. And I think that's part of the reason why. I mean, the sort of world that I knew as a kid growing up in the 1990s is being sort of chipped away by by bad actors. But overall, of course, I mean, the return on investment on helping Ukraine is, it's one of the best sort of spend money by the federal administration, having 28,000 troops in South Korea, keeping the peace and turning the country into a sort of global superstar, economic powerhouse. I mean, that's been good return on investment too.
All right.
Sorry,
I have the mic, so I'll just ask a quick question. John Mearsheimer was at a conference last week that I was at, and he predicted that Russia was guaranteed to win, because Russia is not running out of ammunition. Russia is not running out of troops. The average age of the Ukrainian soldier, he says, is 43. There was this Time article last week where some of Zelensky's advisors said he was delusional for wanting to try to regain all the territory. So evaluate that argument. And who wants the question?
This is all noise. We need to focus on the mission at hand, which is giving the Ukrainians what they need to win and not just what they need to just survive. So I'm more focused on using my energies and time on Capitol Hill, working with congressional offices, making the case. I see all the tittle tattle and The Economist and Time Magazine and all this stuff. Honestly, I ignore it to the extent that my job allows me to. I ignore it, and I'm focused on getting lethal weapons to the Ukrainians as quickly as possible.
Is it better? Okay. So I agree with your assessment of analysis of Professor Mearsheimer, but unfortunately his prediction of this tend to be much more based on facts rather than anything else. The basic kind of mathematics of war from von Clausewitz is very clear. Unlike short-term war, like a Six-Day War or Yom Kippur War, which can be won by any side because of fact of surprise or the concentration of effects and so on, the long-term wars of war attritions are won over the last 200 years by that side that spends on military expenditure more. It's almost universal rule. That was a rule of civil war in the United States between Union and Confederation. It was a law of First World War, Second World War, civil war in Spain, civil war in Russia, civil war in China, and so on. So now Ukraine with partners spends, depending on estimates, 2.5 times or 3 times less than Russia spends on the war. If that situation continues, the fate of this war is doomed.
Thank you. Sir.
Thanks. Dalibor, your point around Ukrainians determining victory is well taken. However, I think a theme of this conference in this moment is the American political situation is increasingly opaque and shifting. How do you judge the Ukrainians' ability to understand those shifts and changes? I'm incredibly skeptical of their understanding of the shifting dynamics.
I mean, I don't have any access to sort of private information from the Zelensky administration, but obviously our political system is difficult to navigate in the best of times. These are not the best of times. I mean, we have great degree of uncertainty about whether and if the next supplemental package for Ukraine is going to be passed, under what conditions, how big it's going to be, whether it's going to last throughout this current Congress. And I think Ukrainians are trying to do what they can under very difficult circumstances. So I'm not quite sure I have a good answer to that. But
just to better state, my point isn't the individual packages. What I more mean is when he states that the objective is Crimea, the courts, etc., that is not going to sync well with an American political system that's skeptical of a counteroffensive in the first place. So the broad narrative and how they're articulating these things in the body politic is more what I'm referring to. And the understanding of how those statements are going to shift the debate in DC and on the ground.
I'm not sure the American public has very strong views on, the counteroffensive as such, or what the Ukrainians should or shouldn't be doing. I think what we've seen throughout the war is that Ukrainian successes on the battlefield have reinvigorated support for Ukraine across the public, and the sort of boring, static warfare tends to erode those gains in terms of public support, and I think that's where the leadership comes into play, and actually the administration does have the tools to give Ukrainians an advantage on the battlefield. It just chooses not to do so.
I'm going to apologize. We're going to go a little over our time because we started late, but I unfortunately have a board meeting at AEI, and I'm going to hand over the reins to Luke from AEI to Hudson, and so you can keep talking. Thank you all. And
Ideological brothers and sisters here.
exactly.
So yeah, right.
Keep talking. This was a great conversation. Thank
Right.
you all.
All right, the gentleman in the back. Can you also identify yourself?
Yeah, so my name is Jackson Mejia. I'm a visiting fellow at FREOP and a PhD candidate in economics at MIT. And my question is sort of ideological in a way. So I grew up, I'm young, I grew up in the early 2000s. I don't have, and a lot of people my age don't have any lingering Cold War prejudices against Russia. And so there's this great sense of ambivalence among lots of people my age, not just toward Russia, but really toward lots of foreign entanglements. And so, and also people my age, we haven't seen very many, military victories, just decades of failure. And so my question is, how do you communicate, the things that you want to people, more in my generation where we don't have these sorts of old, I don't want to
Make me sound old. I get you. I get
Okay,
you. No,
yeah.
For sure. Look, we have to. This goes back to my point about communicating better. And we also have to realize, you said entanglement, foreign entanglement. We're not entangled. No American soldier, sailor, airman, Marine, or I think they call Space Force guardians. Nobody is getting shot at or pulling a trigger. But yet, we are enabling the Ukrainians to dismantle the conventional armed forces of the Russian Federation, which is one of our top geopolitical adversaries. And, one reason why this matters is the economics of this. North America and Europe together account for 45% or so of global GDP. Europe is our number one export market. 45 out of 50 states export more to Europe than they do to China. When an American is building a product or providing a service for export, that's an American job. And right now, Vladimir Putin is trying to undermine the economic stability and prosperity in Europe that not only is intimately connected to the U.S. economy, but impacts the American worker. And we're able to prevent this war from spreading by simply providing the weapons and resources for Ukraine to fight, not for Americans to fight. But if you want it from a more ideological or a values-based reason, any American that believes in the right to self-defense, strong national borders, and the primacy of national sovereignty, so a country to determine how and by whom they are governed, the cause of Ukraine is a noble one. And we're able to support this without, like I said, a single American in harm's way.
If I add just a couple of words, it's up to you. It's your choice whether you like to live with peace-loving people or with the criminals next door. Whether you would like to be attacked anytime, just to bombed, raped, killed, murdered, mutilated, and so on. No, that's what if you saw video from this jazz or rock festival in Israel, next to the border of Gaza, and what happened to those people who did not think about all this stuff. They were very kind of peace-loving people, music-loving people, and so on, but they have been killed in one morning, just all of them. Same story with Ukrainians. Hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians have been killed. They did not care about. Many of them very much liked Russia. Very many of them were speaking Russian language. Very many of them were Orthodox Christians. They have been killed in one day. So it's your choice. What kind of world would you like to live with? With the peace-loving nations or with aggressors? Also consult with the history of the beginning of the Second World War. Many people at the beginning, in 1938-39, think, what is Czechoslovakia? The country nobody knows about. Where is it? Okay, so they gave it to Hitler very easily. Poland, it's not worth to fight for Poland. It's not worth to fight for Danzig. That's a very, very well-known slogan of 1939. Okay, that is why Western nations decided not to fight for Danzig, and that is why not only Poland have been slaughtered, but also Belgium, Netherlands, Luxembourg, Denmark, Norway, France, and so on. So that is why it's your choice. What kind of world and will you like to live?
The man in the black shirt.
Yep. My name is Grant Dever, and I'm a resident fellow at FreeUp with a focus on energy policy. It's clear that the panel, believes that there should be the support, and that with the proper technology, Ukraine could win or have significant advances. For people who have more of the kind of talking point, which is alluded to, of it's not costing American lives, it's very efficient to kind of support this war, and that's why we should do it. But really, the objective is more to have this attrition of the Russian military such that they cannot make future advances. How do you think about that from like a pragmatic standpoint? Like at what point can't Russia pursue further aims? Like there will be a ceasefire. Like what kind of destruction or attrition of their military essentially renders them no longer a strong geopolitical rival? How do you think about that? Like at the most pragmatic case, if we take that as the objective.
I mean, I'm sure Luke will have his own answer to this, but my claim would be that it's ultimately a political question for the Russians to decide, and I think to me the big objective here is that lot of the sort of structure of alliances put in place by the United States after the Second World War was created to deter the Soviet Union and then Russia from doing bad stuff. I mean, the whole reason NATO exists is to keep Russia out of Europe. Now, somebody else is doing NATO's job for the alliance, at the cost of 4% of Pentagon's budget. I say that's a terrific deal. We should sort of seize the opportunity, use it to the maximum, because the alternative is this trend that's been going on for the better part of the past 15 years, in which bad actors around the world question the tripwires, question our commitments, and start poking their ugly heads up. Maybe going back to the other question. I mean, I understand where you're coming from. The argument, nobody on this panel has claimed that America is perfect or that it makes only the right calls. But by historic standards, the system of sort of global tripwires put in place by the United States after the war has led to an unprecedented reduction of warfare and violence around the world. And as this system is starting to fray, the world is getting more and more dangerous. And I feel, as a sort of recovering Eastern European in Washington, that it is my duty to do what I can to help that system recover from this sort of downward trajectory.
So we have time for two more. We'll take them together. The lady in the front, and then the gentleman in the front. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Mariana Davidovich. I'm with the Foundation for Economic Education. I was born in Ukraine. I have lots of family also in Israel, and I want to understand the correlation. And by the way, thank you for the three of you. I've agreed with everything you've said. I was also in the military, so I completely understand. U.S. military, Air Force, not Space Force. But yeah, we can talk later. But what I want to understand is, first of all, could you expand a little bit more on Blinken's statement on the fact that Putin should not win? How does he justify that? And what is the correlation? If Putin is defeated, will that weaken Iran's support with the Hamas invasion of Israel?
We'll do both together.
Oh, okay. This is just a comment from an old man. Just that your comments to me point up the absolute necessity of why we need to teach history in schools. As Andre pointed out, I think people in schools today don't have enough history and background to understand how important it is to support Ukraine and what goes on in the rest of the world and what happens when America pulls back.
Right. So I think we'll just go down the line and address both of those points if that works, and then we'll conclude. Andre, we'll start with you. But let's keep it, everyone, let's just do about a minute so we're not too late.
I cannot answer your question because it's better to ask Mr. Blinken what exactly he had in mind. But this is a very persistent strategy of the Biden administration. So they were a little bit shy to express it publicly last year, but they started to leak this idea about their real strategy last autumn. And if you remember the Time magazine of December 1st, that was the first big article that has been based on the leaks from the US administration, which has a title, "Not to Allow Zelensky to Win Too Much." That was a quotation that has been put in the title of that. I got those leaks from the White House for all last year, but it was leaks. It's not the kind of public stuff. But this year they became much more courageous, and this is why they started to make public speeches. And once again, I recommend everybody to look into the official public speech of the highest representative of the administration. And that is why to ask them how they justify this position. So they have this all call about escalation or about the some kind of threats that would be from the collapse of Putin's regime and so on. But another document that I would very strongly recommend everybody to read is the article in the Newsweek of July 5th this year, in which William Arkin, almost legendary correspondent for this magazine, produced a study based on his conversation with more than dozens of intelligence officers from CIA, military intelligence, Pentagon, and the White House, in which he had revealed the conversations between Mr. Burns, CIA director of the United States, and Mr. Naryshkin, Mr. Patrushev, Mr. Ushakov, and Mr. Putin back in November 21, in which he explained that the main visit of Mr. Burns to Moscow in November 21 is to agree about the rules that would be used for Russia to attack Ukraine. Not to prevent attack, not to deter the attack, but to set up the rules which would be followed by two sides, Putin's Russia and the United States. And the main obligation that have been taken by American side, according to this agreement, is not to attack Russia by itself, or not to allow Ukraine to attack Russia, and not to seek regime change in Russia. And as Mr. Arkin putting another quotation from his people whom he talked about, is again, generally speaking, over these almost 2 years, Russian side and American side are fulfilling those obligations that they have took on themselves back in November 21.
Okay, great. You get two.
One is enough. So I suppose I'm not sure if there is a sort of deliberate strategy to let Putin win in Ukraine, but I'm pretty sure that there is a consistent pattern that goes across successive administrations, which consists of thinking that the United States can be a superpower, can be influential on the world stage, can conduct diplomacy, which is not backed by sufficient military power. And in various instances, our staying power, our commitments have been exposed as somewhat hollow, starting with Red Line in Syria, through what happened in Crimea in 2014, to Afghanistan, and indeed to Ukraine, where in the run-up to the invasion, the president was talking all the time about what the United States was not ready to do and what we were not going to do in response to the situation. And so the question is really that bad actors around the world and our allies alike are asking themselves is whether the United States still has the staying power and still has the sort of same commitment to these various tripwires and alliances that we've set up after the war, that have guaranteed a certain modicum of stability to the international system, or whether we really are reverting to some form of Hobbesian anarchy that I do not wish upon this world.
And regarding your question, your point, these geopolitical challenges are interconnected in a way that, for some reason, most U.S. policymakers fail to recognize. when Russia goes to the Ukraine poker table, it brings its chips from its Syria poker table, its Iran poker table, its Arctic poker table, et cetera, et cetera. When we go to the Ukraine poker table, we just bring our Ukraine chips. We might bring a few NATO chips. That's about it. But we don't see all these issues as being connected. We need to start doing that. That's why support for Ukraine makes Taiwan safer, for example. On the other point, I know I understand what you're trying to say. I think it might be. I wouldn't agree entirely. I think there are legitimate questions that should be asked, and it's just natural for different generations to have different perspectives and views on these matters. And I think that's why it's important that policymakers, lawmakers, commentators communicate better why things matter. However, I do recommend to the young man in the back, watch Red Dawn 1984 version. Oh, it's a classic. Watched it every Friday night. You had to go to the store. You had to rewind it before you returned it. Y'all don't know about that, the young people, but trust me. Be kind, please rewind. No, but in all seriousness, I think you're absolutely right to question. There were soldiers there were U.S. soldiers in Afghanistan that were serving there that hadn't been born at the time of 9/11. Now that warrants some questioning, right, on what the strategy is. I completely get it. But you have to operate in the world you're in, not in the world you want to be in, and Russia is one of our top adversaries. Just because we had a rough time in Iraq and Afghanistan doesn't mean we don't do anything at all. We have to deal with the world that we're in. With that note, I'm going to say thank you to everyone. We're running late, but thanks to our panelists. Thanks, Andre. Thanks, Salo. Thank you for taking the time and your very good questions.